Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're so excited to have you here. We're just going to wait another minute or two to get started to let some other folks trickle in. But again, welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar. We're excited to get started. All right, it's 3:32. I think we could get started. So, welcome everyone. Today's webinar is Executive Functioning. Practical Classroom Tools. We're so excited you're joining us. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. So if you would take a moment just to introduce yourself, where are you zooming in from? How old are your students? Or if you're a parent, how old are the children? How old are your children? And what is one hope that you have for this webinar? So that will help us to make sure that we're addressing all of your needs. So let's just take a minute to introduce ourselves, where you're coming in from, how old are the students you work with or your children, and one hope you have for this webinar. All right, we have some folks chiming in. And again, if you're on a cell phone, and we know you can't use your chat, that's totally fine. But if you're able to, please let us know who you are. Okay, thank you all. So we have a parent of an 8-year-old. We have a school psychologist. Fantastic. So we want to help students, some middle school students. That's great. Caitlin in Montclair, second grader. Caitlin, I'm also from Montclair. So I was going to introduce myself in a moment, but nice to meet a neighbor. Okay, we have a former teacher, parent information, and who works at a parent information center. Welcome. School nurse and 4 neurodiverse children. Thank you so much for sharing. And a 15-month-old. We love our little guys. So excited to see you. Another parent. So some parents and some educators here. We will have opportunities for everyone to engage in this learning. So whether you're an educator or a parent, we're excited to have you here. So I'm going to move forward with our presentation, but thank you all for sharing yourselves into the chat. If you have not already, we're going to still be monitoring the chat, and the Zoom room would also love to learn about you. So please keep introducing yourselves as I move forward here. So just a quick introduction into myself and my colleague. My name is Erica Brenton. I have been an educator for over 20 years now. I started off as a New York City public school teacher, and then I became very invested in social emotional learning. So I became specialized in that area, and that's currently what I do now. I represent SEL4NJ and excited to be partnering with the New Jersey Family Engagement Hub. I live in Montclair, New Jersey, and I have 2 children, a middle schooler and an elementary schooler, and a puppy who's currently driving me a little crazy. In my free time, which I don't have tons of, I like to go on some long walks, and I love to read, and I love to spend time with my family. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Megan Kimpton, who's going to introduce herself.
Hi,
Megan?
everyone. Yes, hi. I am Megan Kimpton. I am an educator this is my 26th year actually in education. Right now, I am the head of school for a small independent school here in Seattle, Washington, so not in Montclair or New Jersey. I have worked in almost every setting there is in education, public, independent, charter, and some nonprofit work as well. I have 2 children. One is a third grader and one is a seventh grader. I love to get outside here in the Pacific Northwest. I love live music and reading when I have time.
Okay, thanks, Megan. So we're going to hear from Megan in a moment, and the two of us are going to kind of take turns here. Um, with presenting to you. So I wanted to share some of the things we hope you leave with after this webinar. So we hope that you leave with some strategies that will strengthen the executive functioning skills in your students or your children. We're going to provide you with tools to help students get started, children get started, and stay on task and stay on track. We'll give you some techniques for teaching self-regulation and emotional control. And we'll provide you with some ways to build organization systems, and we'll help you to get your children, your students more independent. So, one thing I wanted to mention is that we would love this webinar to be as interactive as possible. We are going to present a lot of information, but you also have a lot of information to share too. So, if you're able to respond in the chat to some of our prompts, we'd love to hear from you, and it will be like a nice community kind of gathering. Excuse me. I'm going to read a quick little anecdote from a boy named Sean. And I want you, as I'm reading, to think about if you know any children, maybe you work with students like this, or maybe your own children have these kinds of behaviors. But this is just one story about a child named Sean. Sean is an enigma to his teacher. Sometimes in class, he's oblivious to the teacher's instruction and to the class discussion. He appears to go into Sean land and tune out whatever lesson is being presented. However, he is apt to jump in and make an astute observation or ask the most intuitive question, but frequently it will happen at an inopportune moment. Getting him to start an assignment he doesn't want to do is like trying to get a non-sleepy 3-year-old to go to bed. He has hundreds of delaying tactics. I can't find my pencil. I don't know where to start. I don't feel good. I'll do it when I get home. I need to go to the bathroom. He can sit unconcerned and stare at a blank piece of paper for eons, but more likely he will find a way to disturb or disrupt someone who is trying to work. Occasionally, Sean does get excited about a particular activity and dives right in. He doesn't plan or think about the project. He just starts at full speed and doesn't seem to have an off switch. He pouts when he's asked to pause or stop to do something else. He may sulk and return to Sean land for the rest of the class. When asked what he's doing, Sean always has a reason. I didn't know you meant I had to do it now. I promise I did my homework, but someone must have taken it out of my book bag. The teacher knows that Sean has plenty of ability to do the work in her class, but she's frustrated that he only tries when he wants to, and he seems very uneven in his performance. Even his parents have noticed that he seems a bit immature for her age, and they too are exasperated. Being the professional that she is, the teacher refrains from answering. I wish I knew what was going on with Sean. He's driving me a little crazy. So, just a small story about a child who may sound familiar to you. And let me see, I just need to advance my screen here. Um, and so I wanted to start with a quote that could sort of ground us in the foundation for our learning today, which is that children do well when they can. And this is by an author, Dr. Ross Greene. He's written two books, Lost at School and Raising Human Beings, and they're really fantastic books. I would recommend checking them out. And his belief is that when children have the skills and the tools to do well, they will do well. And all of the behaviors we see that kind of drive us a little crazy when we see our children acting out or not paying attention or unmotivated are not because they are ill-behaved or unmotivated or don't care. It's really because they don't have the skills and they don't have the tools. So we're going to get into a little bit of, well, how do we provide them with that? I'm going to hand it over to Megan, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what is this term executive functioning? What does it mean? And what does the research say? And then we'll get into some strategies in a little bit.
Great.
Megan, off to
Thanks,
you.
Erica. So you can see the definition here on the screen, but often thinking about executive functioning as sort of your brain's file cabinet, how it organizes things, helps you to plan, to focus, to remember, and most importantly, that multitasking to accomplish tasks. And so we see here today, we have really a wide range of ages in the chat. And, it's never too early to think about your executive functioning as well. I'll never forget when my toddler at the time threw a tantrum and somebody said, "Oh, it's really hard to transition and think about what's next." And I thought, of course, that's why it's happening. So you're never too young or too early to start thinking about your child's executive functioning, but really starts to come into play in adolescence. Your prefrontal cortex is often the last part of your brain to really come online, and you can see a really large variance in that with students of different ages, but particularly in middle school. I really like this last bullet here. It's really not about effort. It's really about practice and setting students up, as Ross Green says, to do well when they can and to put the scaffolding in place when they don't often have that with their prefrontal cortex yet, so that they can sort of practice those skills as often as possible. And so I'm sure you have experienced at some point in your life a child who has those executive functioning skills that aren't quite well developed. Thinking about it as not actually having that internal structure. I have two kids, one who is very much still internally unstructured, and she is my adolescent, and then my younger third grader who can show often a much greater level of executive functioning. And so, really putting some of those structures and what we like to call scaffolds in place, so to help them kind of learn those skills step by step. Um, Transitions can often be challenging. It can look like hyperactivity. It can also look like not wanting to do anything. And then also sort of this overreaction to stressors and challenges because they can't always think ahead about what the outcome is going to be from something that's sort of giving them anxiety. It can often cause them to demonstrate an overreaction to that because they can't plan sort of for what the end is going to look like. And we can also call this something called like a jagged profile. So some things might be working really well in your executive functioning toolbox, while other things might be running behind, sort of coming online, as we like to say. And so these are sort of three main parts of your brain that all take different parts of executive functioning. So at the very base is your brain stem. This is really where fight, flight, or freeze comes from. Sometimes we call this your lizard brain because it's really just the very basic, keeps you alive part of your brain. And then layered on top of that is the limbic system. This is where a lot of your emotions come from, your memories and feelings. We can often say sometimes if this system goes offline, that you've flipped your lid, and it's very hard to sort of keep those emotions in check at that point in time. And then finally, sort of here in the front of your brain is your prefrontal cortex, which, as I said before, is really the last to really come online and form. And this is really where you start to have that executive functioning and decision making. This is also why in adolescence, as this is sort of the last to come on, decision making and executive functioning is still very much a work in progress.
Okay, thanks, Megan. That was very informative, and both from your history as an educator and also from your own parenting experience. Um, So I'd like to take us through a short exercise here. I want you to pretend that you have the next 15 minutes of free time. So you can do whatever you want for the next 15 minutes, but it has to be on this to-do list. And so I want you to think about what you would choose first. You can start your homework, you could check your email, you can clean your desk, you can review your notes, get a snack, text a friend, reread the directions, or organize materials. And I'll give you about 15 seconds to choose. Okay. So just a poll here. Curious to hear from you all how that felt. So did you choose quickly? Did you feel stuck? Did you have to change your mind at any time? Are you still deciding? So if you could just enter your uh, number into the chat. I would love to hear, yeah, how was that experience for you? You could either share like an emotion or you can share a number. So a lot of folks chose quickly, some are stuck, some changed their mind, some are still deciding. So we have kind of a range here. Um, Lots of changing minds. Curious if I actually just forgot what was on the list, so my working memory is a little off. Um, so if we think about, that exercise for us as adults, these are decisions that our students and our children are having to make every day. And for somebody who is internally unstructured, which I like that term, right? We want to think about that they might need a lot more support getting started, making decisions, knowing what to do first, prioritizing. And so that leads us to what are the core executive functioning skills that help us to be those decision makers, to use our prefrontal cortex. And so these are the five core skills that all come together to help us with our executive functioning. So we have planning and prioritization, task initiation, working memory, flexibility, and self-monitoring and regulation. And so, kind of like we saw with Sean and what Megan brought up before, right? We could have one of these areas that's we're really strong in. Like my working memory could be really, really strong, but I might really struggle with planning and prioritization. Or maybe all five of these are challenging for me. So there's never one way that we look at executive functioning and say, this child has, struggles with executive functioning because X, Y, and Z. There's no right formula. It could be one, it could be all, and we could also be really strong in some other areas. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you through each one of these skills. We're going to look at what does it look like when it's working? What does it look like when it's not working? And then what are some tools and tricks that you could use with your children or your students? But I'm curious, just before we start to do that, what skills do you think that your students are struggling with the most or need the most support with, I should say? So is it that planning and prioritization piece? Are they having trouble getting started with tasks? Do they struggle with working memory or flexibility, self-monitoring, regulation? So if you're open to putting your the numbers in the chat, yeah, it would be helpful for me to know so that I can cater this presentation to your needs. Okay, so we have a range here. So we have 4 and 5, 1 and 2 all, self-monitoring, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 5. Okay, all I think. Okay, so there's a huge range here. Um, and sometimes it's hard to know, right? They kind of can blur together. It's a lot of shades of gray. Um, but I'm seeing a big range of needs. So let's get into it. So planning and prioritization. What does it look like when it's working? So when it's working, we can see students or children knowing what needs to happen first. They can independently break assignment into steps, right? They don't need support. And then they can use their time and materials efficiently. So, what does it look like when it's not working? Well, we might see them feel overwhelmed, unsure where to start. Things are started late or completed out of order. I just was, thinking for myself sometimes that like this is an area for me that I get stuck in often. And so I need extra tools and support. Doesn't mean I have problems with executive functioning, but it can mean that I, have areas that I'm stronger in than others. So, what are some ways that we could support students with planning and prioritization? And I would also say, after I review these, if you feel that there's other tools or strategies that you're using with your students or with your children, and you're open to sharing those in the chat, again, this could be a very interactive space. So, we'd love to hear from you. So we really want to think about breaking things into manageable steps, right? I have a project due. Maybe it's a science project, maybe it's a work project. Like, how do I actually break that down so that it's manageable? So maybe Monday is the outline, Wednesday I gather my materials, and Friday I, write the results to my science project. I think this, especially in middle school, can be something that we really leave out. Like we expect kids to be able to do these things on their own. Your project is due by the end of the week, but how do they actually, plan out what to do so that that project can be turned in by the end of the week? So I think we can't take for granted that adolescents, middle schoolers need just as much structure and support as our little guys. And so that's where like visual planners, charts come into play, right? We can use Google Calendar. We can use all of the Google Suite to really help us. We can use a whiteboard. Like I have a whiteboard hanging up on my refrigerator, and we kind of dissect projects and look at the week together to really think about what needs to be done on which day. And so visuals are super, super important. And then just modeling what that looks like, right? So I have a big project that I need to do. I'm going to get started with this first because it takes longer, and then I'll get to my other things after that because I know that I can do those things quickly and easily. So the more we can model this for our children and our students, the more that they'll be able to see what it sounds like in a very positive, and very like effective way of planning and prioritizing. Um, okay, task initiation. So what does it look like when it's working? And again, if there are other things that help in the chat that you feel you would like to share with the rest of the group, please feel free to add in. Um, so when it's working, so you'll see children beginning to start their work within a reasonable amount of time, right? Maybe they get a snack before they start, or maybe they need to just talk to a friend real quick, but within a reasonable amount of time. And even if they're unsure of what to do, they're going to start that first step. So they don't need an adult to support them, right? They could do this independently. When it's not working, they might procrastinate, avoid, shut down. Some things we might hear like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. So really starting that task is challenging for them. So what are some things that we could do to support children who have task initiation difficulties? Well, we can provide clear entry points. So what that means is we can actually say to a child, start here, like actually circling the number of the area where we want them to start. Like maybe they're feeling really disorganized, and so we can get them started. So just an example of something I've done with my children before. If you look at the bottom right, there's like a one, two, and three. So these were three things they needed to do for homework, and I put a post-it on each one and said, this is what you need to do first, this is what you need to do second, this is what you need to do third. So really providing them with that entry point. We can offer peer modeling or sentence starters. So if we have, let's say, we're assigning an essay to a child on the American Revolution, maybe they have just no idea how to get started. So we can provide the first sentence for them. The American Revolution started in 1775. I'm going to set the timer for the next 5 minutes. I want you to come up with five more sentences. So, really getting them going. And then peer modeling is always something that could be supportive for a child who really is strong at task initiation. We can partner them with a child who really needs that extra support. Again, timers I think are really crucial. I love this particular timer because it can show how much time has passed, how much time they have left. And then finally, we can reinforce effort. So even if a child does not finish their assignment, they are stuck with the middle. If they got started with the task right away, we want to highlight that and we want to reinforce it. So you got started right away. That is, so great to getting started with your essay. Or I noticed you solved problem number one, like right on. So again, we're not expecting them to be perfect, but we are rewarding and acknowledging the effort that it took to get started.
Erica, there's a question in the chat about um, a different kind of visual timer than the sort of elapsed time timer because
Hmm.
their kid doesn't necessarily pay attention to this one. I think even like a digital countdown or even like an old school egg timer that has the really loud bell when you're done, anything that sort of allows them to know that time is elapsing. Um, we don't teach analog, so an old school clock time telling the same way to sort of deep knowledge, and we know that that has impact on the brain. When kids only look at digital clocks all of the time, they're not able to necessarily think visually about the amount of time that's going by. And so, even having an analog clock and helping them to understand, if you have 30 minutes, that's from the 6 to the 12 or whatever that might be, is helpful. And just to go back to what Erica was saying on that reinforcing effort, when we're thinking about how a brain develops these executive functioning skills, reinforcing actually creates sort of the highways in the brain from this is a task I need to do to this is how I do it. So the more that you can reinforce when you're seeing your child or the children that you work with using those executive functioning skills and strategies, the faster those connections will be made in their brain.
Oh, Megan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You add so much good stuff to this conversation. And then Alexis also had a recommendation for using YouTube as well. Yeah, I would say any technology that your child responds to, like I don't know if I should feel ashamed by saying this, but I sometimes give my child my phone and it has like a countdown. And he doesn't get distracted by it, but anything you think your child responds to. So thanks, Alexis, for adding that in. Flexibility. So this is the example that Megan gave before about her 2-year old at the time. I think you had mentioned she was 2 and she could not transition. So um, when we are flexible, when we have that part of our brain that is feeling, can adjust, we are okay when something doesn't go as planned, right? We can come up with another strategy. We can feel comfortable with another solution. We can try alternative strategies. So we can come up with those on our own and then accept feedback. So if you are a teacher or you're a parent and you want to let your child know, hey, this was not the right thing to do, but we can try this, that they're willing to accept that. A child who, really their flexibility is not working, they can become very upset when plans change. They might have very rigid thinking. I can't do this. I don't even want to try. Um, and so, what are some ways that we can support flexibility? So, oh, sorry. As soon as someone wrote in the chat that they can't hear anything. Can you hear me, Megan?
Yes, I think
Okay.
we're fine. I'm not sure what the issue
Maybe their
might be.
volume.
Yeah.
Okay, that's okay. I think it could be something with your volume. So, Alexis is going to solve that for you in chat. Thanks, Alexis. So we can offer choice within clear limits, right? We can, for a younger child, that might look like, you have to wear a shirt today. It could be your blue shirt or your red shirt. You have to wear a long sleeve, and so you can choose which one. So that really like allows a child to feel that there is some flexibility in that choice. Um, if you're working with a middle school student and you want them to write a book report, so you could say, like, you could choose any book you want, but these three questions have to be answered. So some kind of choice, but within the limits that you want them um, to be successful in. We can also model plan B thinking. So maybe you have a book report and you needed to get something at the library, but the library is closed. So, well, let's find the article online instead. It could be something as basic as, oh, we ran out of, this for dinner. Let's try this. So we want to model that, and we want to provide solutions for children, and we want to provide them with these external structures so that they can internally absorb that. Um, practicing small transitions. So when I was a classroom teacher, my students who had trouble with flexibility really had trouble with transitions. They didn't want to stop doing what they were doing. They couldn't move on to something else because they were so engaged and invested. So we really want to practice successful transitions. And that could look like, having a countdown. So we're going to have 5 more minutes of our art project time. Think about what you need to do in the next 5 minutes. Okay, we have 4 minutes left. It's time to gather materials, 3 minutes left. So we're really providing them with that scaffold so that when that transition time comes, right, it's time to now move into reading time or math time or some other time, or the bell is ringing. They are provided with that structure and support so that when they get to that place, it's not a total breakdown. Um, and then we want to normalize mistakes. So saying something like, well, your science experiment didn't really work this time, right? So that's okay. Like, let's just try to use different variables. Or, oh, with younger children, like you really tried to color within the lines, but it didn't work this time. Let's try another strategy next time. So it's okay to make mistakes. And as much as we can allow that to be the sort of gold standard, that it's okay to make mistakes and often actually even good to make mistakes, the more flexible they'll feel to try new things and to fail and to come up with new ideas.
I think kindly reminding them of that when you move on and you try it again is also good. So, hey, remember last time this felt really hard because of X, Y, and Z. What can we do this time so that it will feel better?
That's a really good point. And bringing them into the conversation. Working memory. I think for me, I don't know, Megan, about you. I find this to be one of the hardest things to support children with because it just feels like something where they need a lot of extra support. So when it's working, we see kids following multi-step directions. They're able to hold information in their mind while they're working, right? They don't need to ask a million times for directions or what am I supposed to do or can you help me? They're really able to do that independently. And when it's not working, we might see kids forgetting directions, like losing track of what they're doing mid-task, need repeated reminders, ask a lot of questions. What am I supposed to do? Can you remind me again? I think sometimes that could be learned helplessness, and sometimes it could be a working memory issue. So, what could we do for working memory? Lots of visual reminders, written directions, again, especially important for kids in middle school. My son comes home and he has my middle schooler, and he has like, um, you know, a billion different Google Classroom assignments, and they're all in different spots. And it's so hard for him to keep that knowledge of what he's supposed to do in his mind. And so that's when we really have that visual on our whiteboard. Of just everything he needs to do when it's due by, and it's color coded, and it's very helpful for him. Um, Chunking instructions into smaller steps. So similar to what we talked about with prioritization and planning, thinking about if we have, a big assignment due, how can we create smaller steps for children so that they can really hold that information in their mind to really understand, what they're supposed to do. And then maybe even having an opportunity for them to have a check mark or have some way of marking it complete, so they feel resolved in their mind. And then, of course, we all know these from our elementary school days, mnemonic devices. So, any way of getting them to memorize, like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally for some kind of algebraic equation, or I forgot the one that I used for when I was learning about the planets. But anyway, anything that we can get them, any tool, little tools or tricks. And then encouraging them to repeat or write directions. I have also a 9-year-old, and I will say something to him, and he runs away. And I make him come back constantly. And I say, what did I just say? Can you repeat the directions? What are we supposed to do in the morning? Where is your backpack supposed to go? So when they can repeat directions back to you, it's really supporting their working memory, making sure that they remember all the expectations, and that they're on board.
Erica, there's a question in the chat that says, who is predominantly providing this help? Teachers, parents, the student? And I would say that it's a full court press and takes a village. Everybody really has to be working on these strategies to help a student. If you're noticing that this is challenging for your student at school, you might want to broach a conversation with their teacher, ask what strategies they might be using in the classroom. Sometimes when everyone uses the same strategy, it can be helpful for a student. And then over time, helping the student use these strategies independently is the ultimate goal. And so that's why modeling a lot of these things, practicing them so many times so that it starts to become part of their daily habit and their executive functioning skills is the ultimate goal. Not saying that's easy and can often take a lot of repetition, but what our end goal is to have the student be able to independently use these strategies and tools on their own.
Let us know if that answered the question. And if you have any additional questions, it's a great question. It's a lot of heavy lifting for a lot of people. So we're going to continue on, but if you have an additional question, and I just should mention also, we do have a Q&A at the end. So if you have a pressing question and it's not getting answered, please know that we'll address it at the end of the presentation. And so this was one I think that a lot of you had mentioned in the chat that you were really looking for support with, is that self-monitoring and regulation. Um, this is one that I feel that I have had to teach a lot, a lot. So when it's working, we can, and I think also for adults, right? This is something that like we need practice with too. So noticing when we're a little off, when we're out of focus, when we're emotionally a little bit, unsure of what's going on. Oh, and also being able to use coping and regulation strategies. So that's when it's working. When it's not working, we can have difficulty managing those emotions. There might be some impulsive behavior, giving up quickly. You could just see it as like just being difficult, right? It's like that behavior could be very loud and challenging. So, what are some things we could do to support kids with self-monitoring and regulation? One of the things I really love is to teach emotion labeling and regulation tools. I also would recommend that this be done at a time when a child is not in a dysregulated state. So, what we want to teach them is like, what are emotions? What are all these things that go on inside of us? And so, one of the ways to do that is by using something called a mood meter. You can just Google this. It's a fantastic resource. And what it does is it helps a child to identify, are they feeling high energy, low energy? Are they feeling pleasant, unpleasant? And then once they're able to really understand those broad categories, they could really fine tune and go into like what emotion they're actually experiencing. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the expression, you have to name it to tame it, but being aware of our emotions and understanding what they are can really help us to self regulate and can really help us to calm down. So, using a tool like the mood meter is a fantastic resource. I've seen them in classrooms where teachers have them posted on students' desks. I've seen them posted in the classroom when you first walk in the morning for younger kids. It's just these like four colors for older kids. It's like the actual emotion, and they take their name and they put it on the specific feeling that they're having. It's a really fantastic way of starting the day just to get a sense of to know like what are your students feeling. Um, we can model our own self-reflecting language. So I oftentimes will say, I'm feeling really frustrated right now. I need to go in the other room and take a few deep breaths. Or I'm feeling like I have a lot of stress and I need to do X, Y, and Z to help myself. So it's really helpful for children to see that we also struggle with emotions sometimes and with our feelings. And so it's also really helpful for them to see what tools we use to support ourselves to get out of it. And building check-in points. So this is especially helpful if you are let's say you're teaching and you notice, one of your students is a little off. You can say to them, I want you to work for 5 minutes. I'm going to put the timer on. I'm going to come back in with you. I'm going to check in with you in 5 minutes so they know that they have that safe place when you come back to them. I've also done it as a teacher where if I notice a child is struggling with self-regulation or emotional control, the moment I see them kind of getting squiggly or off, like I'll have a secret code with them. So I'll like touch my nose or I'll give them like a wink. Like we have a special way of communicating so they know that I can see that you're struggling right now and everything's going to be okay, right? We can get you the support you need. And then I think movement and mindfulness breaks is always really helpful. Meditation, getting kids up, getting them moving around can really, really be helpful for regulation, especially if kids have been in their seats for a really long time, or even in middle school, if you have no idea what happened in the class before you, they could have been sitting on their Chromebooks for like an hour and then they're coming to your classroom, right? And so how can we get them to like get them out of that sedentary space and get them moving and in a different spot? Um, so those are all suggestions for self-monitoring and regulation. Okay, so just a quick reflection, curious to hear from you. Were there any tools that we presented to you that you think you might be able to use with your children, like immediately? Maybe tomorrow you want to look up the mood meter, or you might use a mnemonic device, or you might chunk the instructions a little differently. So, just curious how this resonated with you. If you're open to entering your thoughts into the chat box, we'd love to hear any tools that were useful for you. Okay, so we have mood meter. Oh, we have somebody who already uses the mood meter and it's super helpful. That's fantastic. I also use it for myself. So it could be also really helpful for adults, especially working with children and when we're in stressful situations. All right, I'll leave the chat open for another few seconds just to hear anything you're thinking. Um, so we have more mood meter. Sorry, go ahead, Megan.
No, I was just going to say visual planners. And I was going to say, um, if there's one thing you do, that self-talk, like, hey, I'm going to write myself a list because I have to do this recipe for dinner, or I know we're getting ready to go on a trip. So let's make a list of all the things we need to do to get ready for that. Or, even as Erica said, like, hey, I need a break because I'm feeling frustrated. And just to go back, somebody mentioned chunking assignments. Keeping things for kids who are struggling with executive functioning in groups of 3 is super helpful. That active working memory, when it's a challenge, often can't remember things beyond 5. So it's trying to keep things in that 3 to 5 list, depending on the child you're working with, can be super helpful.
That's awesome. Thank you, Megan. Um, oh, okay. Sorry, I don't want to call you. I was gonna say we have some practicing small transitions, checklists. Um, All right, so let's do this. Let's do that in the Q&A. There's a question about any visual planner recommendations for parents to provide to their kids for school to home-based responsibilities. Um, I do have a couple of recommendations, which I will provide to you in the Q&A. So thank you for asking that question. Um, so we have about 15 minutes left. I'm just going to go over this super quickly. These are just some, just kind of asking you what you might do. You don't have to answer it in the chat if you want to, but these are just different scenarios of things we might see. So, just curious to hear from you what strategies you might use. So we have a student sits with their paper in front of them during independent work time. They sharpen their pencil, they look around the room, they ask multiple questions, but they never begin the task. So maybe in your minds, just because we're a little bit limited on time here, thinking about what strategy might you use for a student who exhibits this kind of behavior. Um, to me, this is a kind of child who, and then, yeah, I would just say if you want to put your answer in the chat, love to hear from you, given all of the strategies and suggestions we've given you. But this is a child who might struggle with task initiation or planning and prioritization. We could, provide them with a clear first step, just get started here, and then set a timer and say, finish X, Y, and Z before I return. So this is the I don't know where to start child. Then we have the half done again. So we have a child who's turning work incomplete consistently. They run out of time. They didn't realize there were more steps. Um, so this could be somebody who struggles with planning and prioritization or working memory. So we really want to provide them with those visible steps. Maybe we have a completion checklist. And I like this idea of previewing an assignment before it started. So we can say, let's look at this together. What do you need to do to get this accomplished? And what are some ways that I can support you? What are some ways you can support yourself?
I also think it's great to give them check-in times here. So if, it's been 15 minutes, you should be moving on to step two at this point in time to help them sort of understand the passage of time.
Yeah, great, great suggestion, Megan. Um, And a child who just is like, this isn't how I do it. They become upset when an activity changes or when their original plan doesn't work and they shut down or refuse to continue. So this might be somebody who struggles with flexibility or self-regulation. Um, you know, I would say taking a break, right? Let's just pause here. Let's maybe use a mood meter, check in on our emotions, maybe offering a choice, right? You can complete this at the table, or you could go to, the quiet corner and finish it. And then really helping them get started. It seems like a child who's really struggling to get started and could use some additional scaffolding and support. So that brings us to our Q&A. Just curious if anybody has any questions. I wanted to answer this visual planner recommendation. So there's one really fantastic app. I'm going to put it into the chat. It's called Greenlight. And it helps with managing home and school responsibilities, and a child could have access to it themselves. You put in all of the responsibilities that they have. They could also add in, and then they check it off when they're done. You could also assign it to um, allowance. So if a child, finishes all their chores, maybe they get like a $5 allowance. I don't know if you're interested or into allowances. That's obviously a personal family choice, but it's a really nice resource. And then there's another one that is escaping my mind. I think it's Megan, maybe you've heard of it. It's called Star Link or Starlight. I'm gonna think of it. And I'm gonna just give me a second. I'm gonna get it for you. But any other questions before we move to our closing? And again, these could be
While
questions.
we're waiting for your active working
Yes,
memory,
yes.
Erica, I think we can never diminish the importance of an actual paper planner as well, and the actual physical task of writing things down and seeing them in there. Again, the immediacy of technology can sometimes make executive functioning harder, not easier. There are a lot of great ways technology can help, but any sort of paper planner can also be helpful where kids can see a calendar, they can actually see a list and write it down and physically check it off. There's a lot of research that says that sort of neuromotor kind of doing an exercise helps your brain to think about those things as well.
That's a super useful suggestion. And as you were sharing that, I found the app. It's called Skylight, and it's a family planning calendar online. And so everything is color coordinated. I think it is something you have to purchase. I think it's pretty low cost, but I've heard really phenomenal reviews about it. So you're welcome. Please feel free to try that out. Any other questions? Oh, thanks, Alexis. Well, that took us so fast.
Amazing.
Yes, put a link to it in the chat. Um, any other questions before we move on to our closing? And this could be questions for me and Megan. It could also be questions for the rest of the room here. There's a lot of educators in the Zoom room who could also answer some questions. So we'll just kind of hold another minute here. All right. Well, as we're waiting, I want to share the last slide here, which is just a whole bunch of resources for you. There's books, there's articles, there's classroom tools. And then you also saw in the chat box some of the suggestions for some of these planning and online planning and organization tools. This presentation will be sent to you. So you could access any of these resources when you get that email. There's also an evaluation link, so please, give us as much feedback as you can. We want to get better and make sure that we're addressing all of your needs. So that is the end of our webinar for today. We hope that it was informative. If you want to just drop quickly in the chat one word, I guess your feeling or one word you want to leave with, we'd love to hear from you. And we hope you have a fantastic afternoon. And thanks for spending the past hour with us. It was really um, a great hour.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for all the work you do. Glad it was helpful and informative for most. Thank you so much.